Ima, I am going to end my life. So, and when I do, what's your preferred method?
Wow.
I'm like, well, don't shoot yourself because I don't have a preferred, but I can tell you my least preferred.
Right.
Like, don't shoot yourself.
What a difficult question to
and
answer.
don't hang yourself. So he swallowed poison. And I knew when I found him gasping that he swallowed it to take care of me.
Welcome back to another episode of Inspiration for the Nation. My name is Yaakov Linger, and could be you're listening to this on Tisha B'Av. It could be you're listening to this on not Tisha B'Av. Chances are it's not Tisha B'Av when you're listening to this. But if it is, I think this is I don't know if there's an appropriate episode for Tisha B'Av, but when it comes to Hashem's home, the Beis HaMikdash, and the fact that we had two of them, and we're yearning for the third one, that loss, that not having the Beis HaMikdash in this world, it sometimes could be hard to relate to. It's obviously at the time was very relevant, and people were easily able to see what that loss was like. And today we don't even know what we're missing out on, and it's sometimes hard to relate. So I think my conversation with Aliza Bulow is a nice way to understand what we have and just the pain and suffering that comes with loss. You're going to hear in this episode how she lost her son to suicide and a lot of other things. The conversation is not just about that, and that's not who she is. I would, between the last podcast I hosted and now, well over 100 episodes, maybe over 115 episodes, I think this is the most powerful conversation I've ever had on any podcast I've ever done, and I don't say that lightly. Aliza is one of the most powerful people I've ever met, and you'll hear in this conversation just what that experience was for her and her family to lose their son and brother, and also her relationship with her husband. You'll hear that and what a beautiful marriage they have, even if as of now it's they each have just different ideas about going about. Well, you'll hear about it. I don't want to spoil it too much, and also about what Aliza does. Core. It's a fascinating concept that you'll hear more about in this episode. And this week's episode is in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shleima and Miriam Sarah bas Yaakov Moshe. And also, I'd like to thank this week's sponsor, the one, the only, the Good Faith Effort podcast, who you'll hear more about in this episode. Here it is. We can all use some inspiration to help us overcome the obstacles we encounter in our lives. Get ready for thrilling conversations about struggle and triumph with those in pursuit of making a positive impact in this world. I'm Yaakov Linger, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. All the way from Denver, we have Aliza with us to share your experiences, your stories, and what you're up to now, which we'll get to. But first, if you could take us back to, I guess, your childhood. What was your childhood like?
It was an interesting childhood. I moved around a lot because my father was finishing his PhD work. So I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. And then we moved every year for the first 4 years while he did postdoctoral work. And then got a position at University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. But my parents at that time had separated from religion because of different experiences that they had. My mother had lost her parents very young. She was 26 when both of her parents were dead, and she had two little girls.
What religion was she a part of?
So she was Protestant at the time, but she was lapsed Protestant, and so was my father, lapsed Protestant. But as they came together, having their two kids and looking at the world, they thought in 1968, we should give our kids something that gives them a direction, or at least literacy in the society. And it was a very professorial decision. We should give them literacy, not really religion, but literacy. So they decided to create some church experiences for us, and we went to some big churches and some little churches, but mainly became part of a house church, what's called a house church, which I would say is the equivalent of a Reform chavurah. Mm-hmm. Kind of met in a finished basement, 10 families, got together every week, sang songs, told stories, kids played, adults schmoozed, and we did that and read. Like it was the moving into the 70s, so it was the human potential movement and manifesting your own destiny, and I loved that stuff. We read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and I was interested in like the manifesting your own destiny piece, and decided at 10 that I don't believe in any of this Christian stuff. It doesn't make any sense.
10 years old.
10 years old.
You're like
I was
really forward thinking. I don't think 10-year-olds are thinking about like whether they believe or don't believe in their religion.
Right. So I was thinking that way, and it's possible if they would have had the diagnosis at the time of ODD, which is obsessive defiance disorder, that maybe I would have gotten it at the time. I was a challenging child, a dafkanik. My parents didn't know the word. But possibly in allusion to my future, they called me their New York Jewish lawyer.
Yeah.
They argued about everything. But I did argue about this too. And 10 is like just old enough to leave home. And I insisted I wasn't going with them to church anymore. Done. So I stayed home and I read. And I realized because my parents were very into the civil rights movement, one of our stops was in Washington, D.C. when I was 4. And I remember clearly at 4 going on the Poor People's March and walking past the mall in Washington, D.C. and seeing all the plywood houses with tarps on them as people like made camp on the mall in Washington to protest. It was part of the Poor People's Campaign. And I have such a vivid memory of like holding my little 4-year hand up and holding onto my mother and the blood draining and like walking in the sea of knees, like that's what I could see and walking past that. But my parents got to hear the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King speak, and they were transformed. They really felt like this is our purpose. Like,
were they by his famous speech?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I don't remember.
But they've heard him speak.
Certainly they knew that,
right.
And they held that. And so when we moved to Rochester, my father became dean of students at University of Rochester. One of his major goals was to get black people into college and keep them in college. Getting them in was one thing and keeping was another. And he partnered up with a black professor, and they wrote a book, Making It in College, for black kids to stay in college, to help them stay in college. And that was his work. And their community work was about integration, community integration. So I was raised in an environment of a real purpose. We're a very purposeful family. We didn't eat grapes or lettuce because, of course, they were harvested by poor immigrants who weren't paid fairly, and so we boycotted those things, grew our own. My mother was very into health foods, and nursing at that time was not a thing, nursing your children. They're bottle fed. My mother's part of the Lchaim League, and she's very progressive, proactive, and all that stuff. She didn't let us play with Barbie dolls because women aren't shaped that way. She didn't want me watching. We were limited in TV time because why should we have values like that in our life? I loved I Dream of Jeannie. She hated it. It was all about a man dominating a woman.
Right.
So I was raised in that kind of environment. So I was raised in an environment of critical thinking and proactive movement. And so at 10, I was able to exercise some critical thinking and proactive movement and say, this is not what I believe in. On the other hand, if I would be atheist, where would I get holidays, rituals, meeting, presents? I mean, at 10, that's a thought, right? Where would they come from? So I started to consider other pathways to meaning. There was no internet, but I read. And I looked into psychic healing and chakra meditations and all kinds of different things. And one day I had like a God experience. And I was like, that's so weird because I don't believe in God. How could I have a God experience?
What was your experience?
It was actually in a meditation class. So I just felt a presence. And I felt like that's not somebody else in this class. It's not the connection I'm trying to make with this other person. I think that's a power outside of me. And
How old are you at this time?
I was 14 by then.
Okay, that's a little. It's still very young, but if you're like 11, having this out of body experience,
maybe I was
feeling
like a little bit. I was probably younger. And I was probably like 13. I think I was 13, 14. Anyway, so by the time I started high school, my parents had taken a trip around the country for a year studying interracial neighborhoods and desegregated housing. When I was 10, came back to Rochester. My parents got divorced. A very nice divorce. They're kind of like first cousins, like friendly till this day.
It's always the dream when it comes to divorce.
It's really, I mean, it was the best divorce I've ever seen. And still, it was a divorce. And I'm still at 58 re-understanding that experience and the aftermath of it. Because the aftermath of divorce is your parents have to start a new life and find new romance, which means they're outward focused instead of inward focused on their teenagers and raising them and giving them what they need for their life. So, which worked out perfectly because I wanted my own space. Of course, every teenager wants to go on their own direction. And I had that room because I had the room to go because they were busy with rebuilding their lives. So I was busy rebuilding mine, like trying to figure out where I want to go and what I want to do and what gives me purpose and meaning. And once I decided I do believe in God in the beginning of my freshman year of high school, and at that time I was in Portland, Oregon, going to a performing arts high school, taking ballet every day and musical theater and sang with the jazz band. But I just went to the library there. It was 1978, so obviously no internet. There were no Jews in the school. But there were books on the religion shelf, and I just decided I'm just going to read across this shelf and find the one that speaks to me. So I started reading, and I found the book To Be a Jew. And I just loved it.
Who wrote that book?
Chaim Halevi Donin.
I don't want to ask if he's still around because I have
He's not.
Okay.
But I actually met with his daughter.
Really?
Yeah, because I wrote that in an article one time, and she was so excited to read that, and we went out for dinner one time in Queens.
He already passed away.
He had already passed away, but she wanted to.
But that's incredible. Always writing Svarim or books and then thinking it's going to impact the world, but even after someone's gone, really. So you read that book and what?
Hashem was totally calling me because I didn't know any Jews, and I read a book.
Right.
I mean, really.
Right.
And I was 14.
And you probably, at that point, you never really even saw?
I had met a Jew.
You met a Jew.
I had met a Jew, but I didn't really know anything about Jews. All I knew is they didn't believe in Jesus. They're like us, they don't believe in Jesus. Okay, so they have synagogues like us. We go to churches, they go to synagogues. We believe in Jesus, they don't believe in Jesus. That was it.
Right.
That's all I knew. That was basically it. So I learned a little more, and as I learned more about Judaism, I learned, wow, this is so cool. It has everything I'm looking for. It's got holidays and purpose and meaning, and a one God concept without any complicating factors, and all this cool stuff to do about it. It's not just a believe religion; it's a do religion, which I really liked. The purpose and the meaning of it, and ways to function because of it. So it's not just in your heart; it's in your life, in your hands, in your breath, and in the way you walk in the world.
Was there any part of Judaism that it was a little harder for you to digest, whether?
So not in the beginning because I loved it, but once I learned about Kol Isha, that was hard.
Oh, because
and it's still hard every day because I know a song pretty much for everything, and I think in songs or lines of songs, and I always have to look over my shoulder. Can I say that?
I could leave and you could just sing for me.
Exactly. So in a conversation, there would just be there would be songs that come up, and it's just it's a constant check, check, check. You have to live with it all the time to filter that.
That's hard.
So yeah.
Okay, so you converted, and you soon after, not so long after, got married.
Well, I converted at 16.
Okay. No, in five in the grand scheme of things, 5 years.
I converted at 16, and then I went to Israel at 16 and a half. After 10th grade, I went to Israel. And I thought I was just going to go for a year, but I ended up staying for 2 years and 4 years. I loved it in Israel. So I studied. I went to Bravenders and I studied in yeshiva, which it was yeshiva. It wasn't seminary, and I didn't know the difference at the time. That was the hashgacha. That's where I went. They had a high school program, and I was young.
Was it even a thing back in the day for classic Orthodox people to go to Israel?
There weren't so many gap year programs.
Right.
It was much
now.
more,
it's the norm. Even it's becoming more than the norm.
Right.
Every day.
Is.
Back then,
it was much more of a junior year abroad. Mm-hmm. So I was So I didn't fit into the high school program because I didn't have enough background. So I went to the college program because there were Baalei Tshuva then. So they had a beginner's track in the college level program, but it was mostly junior year abroad. Stern Girls was the basics of the program. And for me, it was a big awakening because I was always on the top of my class. I was always in inner city schools, but I was top of my class. I always did my homework, but it took 2 seconds. I'd write papers on the bus.
You strike me like a goody-goody.
Right. I flew at the top of my class, and I thought I was smart until I went to a place where everybody was like me, and I realized I'm so average in the midst of educated, smart people.
Because the people you're with had a higher IQ, or because they just, whatever you're studying, they're worlds ahead of you.
They were worlds ahead of me. That was a challenge. But because they all came from college educated stock. I mean, in the school that I was in, because my parents were so dedicated to, we basically moved into more of an inner city neighborhood, and I went to more of an inner city school. And yet I had.
So you always had an edge on everyone. You're a little more educated.
Yeah. And I read well, and I read young, and I read a lot. And it was just challenging to be in a school, in those schools, where I just had a better vocabulary, and I knew more than a lot of people around me. So it was thrilling to go to Bravender's, and I was so and even the shul that I was a part of in Portland, I was the most knowledgeable teen among all the teens, because I went to the, maybe I was a little teacher's pet, but I went to the rabbi's teen study group, and I joined all the teen learning group, and I went to all the adult ed programs, and I became a madricha for the youth group, and I was full in. So I thought I knew a lot about Judaism when I went to Israel. When I found out I knew hardly anything. So I started studying at Bravender's, and it was yeshiva structured, so I couldn't do Gemara, so I did Mishnah in the morning. So in the morning there was a chavruta for 2 hours, and then a shiur, and then there's if you needed the tutorial before the chavruta time, there's that. Lunch, and then the afternoon, twice a week was Mishnah Torah, and twice a week was Mishnah Bruria. And for me, it was like Mishnah all the time. There's so many Mishnahs around here. And it was all in Hebrew. There's not much translation at the time. So for me, it was I wasn't even learning. I was just reading and translating, just working on the reading and translating. But the more I learned, the more I loved it. I just loved it. And really the first year I was drowning, the whole year. I did all the work, came to all the classes, loved it. And then I wanted to stay for another year. My mother required me to come home for the summer to consider it. So I went home for the summer to consider it. But as I worked over the course of the summer, so many connections were made. All year long, as much work as I did to keep up, it just went click, click, click all summer long. And by the time I got back to Israel, my Hebrew was better, my Kriya was better, my Havana was better, and I a lot of the concepts I didn't understand had clicked into place, and I was able to learn more the second year. So yeah, I loved it.
It's such a healthy experience to be at the top of something, and then to walk into it, and then wait a second, I am classic.
It's very humbling.
Right.
It's very humbling.
It's such a good experience. So, okay, so I want to get to, you get married to your husband, and when I got married, I went back to Israel to learn there, my wife and I, but you guys went to Russia.
Right.
So why did you go to Russia?
So our relationship, we first of all met in Israel. He was in law school, and he had come just for his sister's wedding. And so we met through his sister in Israel. And I wanted to stay in Israel forever. Hashem laughs. He has a really good sense of humor. So on my list, because I was a tachlis dater, I wasn't in the shidduch world, but tachlis means I was only going out for the purpose of marriage. So I knew that I needed somebody who did not speak English. Not even as a second language, because I was not taking a chance. No way was I leaving Israel. And he, on his list, had a girl with Yiddish-speaking European parents is the kind of girl he wanted. And look, he went all the way to Israel to meet a girl with Geisha parents, and his English is stunning. So, yeah.
So you guys met?
So we met, and we knew pretty much right away. And then his father said, look, you just graduated. You just started your first year of law school. You just finished your first year, and his father told him, look, I have a wife that I support already. You need to wait until you can support your wife. So 2 years. And we were like, 2 years?
That's a long time.
That's a very long time.
From dating, yeah.
A very long time. So we didn't get engaged the first year because I didn't want to have a 2-year engagement. But
you dated for that year, or you?
Yeah, well, I had to stay in Israel in the army, and he was back in the States, and I finally got out. I got what's called a dechiyat shirut, a service deferral.
Well, let's go back to that for a second. Why did you join the army?
I joined the army because I wanted to serve the country. Mm-hmm. But also because I did not get into Hebrew U when I applied because I hadn't served the country. So at that time, there were multiple service options available. One was Sherut Leumi, one was the Army, one was some other kind of service. But as I looked into it more, actually it really happened in a ballet class that I took at that time.
How many people say that? In a ballet class, that's how my introduction to joining the Army was.
So this is what happened. So okay, I didn't get into Hebrew, and now I'm thinking about, okay, I need to serve the country. So probably what I'll do is, I was a budding photographer. I'll go back to the States. I'll take pictures of Israel. I'll make a slideshow. That's like a PowerPoint.
Yeah, I know what a slideshow is.
I'll make a slideshow with like beautiful pictures of Israel and Israeli music, and I'll go to college campuses and I'll do like hasbara for Israel for a year. I'll travel around. I'll like talk about Israel, because even then Israel did not have good PR. And then I'll be able to go back, and when the committee says, what have you done to serve the country? I'll be able to say, I did this. That was my plan. So starting to do that, I started taking ballet again, because I went to this performing arts high school, and I thought I'll just for exercise, right? So I joined this ballet class, and it's the first time I was with all Israelis, because at Bravender's I was with all English speakers, and at Hebrew U I was with all foreigners. But this ballet class in the middle of Yerushalayim was all Israelis, and I was the oldest in the class, because I was 18, and all the other 18-year-old girls were in the army. And that's when I realized, oh, if I'm planning on staying here, I should do the normal thing.
Right.
Not my own thing. Like,
Right.
I've done a lot of my own things, but let me do, like, the thing. So then I had to decide between the two things, Shirut Leumi or the army. Shirut Leumi for religious girls, army for everybody else. But I thought, and then I learned much more about the army and it's called a per chavrati, the gap in Israeli society between the religious and non-religious, partially because of non-religious service in the army. And I thought, the army doesn't need me, but maybe that gap needs me to serve in the army. Like, I would do that to help just weave together Israeli society a little bit by being a religious person in the army. And I thought to myself, if I could become religious in a performing arts high school and all that is attendant with that, Hamevin Yavin, then if I could become religious in that high school, I could stay religious in the army in Israel, I thought. So I decided to
So you
enlist.
thought? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I did actually.
I know. I'm joking.
I did. So I went into the army in the Nachal branch. Nor Chalutz Lchaim is what it stands for, young pioneering warriors. But the inside joke was Nor Chatzi Lochem. It's like half army, because you're really building settlements. So
Right.
it's
You're
a
not
lot
like shooting a gun at the enemies, right?
So no, you're not, and maybe you might, because if you're building settlements, you might be attacked.
Wow.
So for that branch of the army, girls had the longest basic training. We had 2 months instead of 2 weeks. So 2 months, I learned 3 different guns, an M16, a Uzi, and a Galil. And we had longer runs, and we had more training, and we had chemical warfare defense and a few things like that, because we would be on an outpost on a hill, and we might be attacked. And all the girls were issued Uzis. So Uzi's a girl's gun, because you just spray from the waist. You don't have to aim it, like, even though we practiced or whatever, but yeah. So it was a sexist army at the time. But eventually we were put on a post on a hill in the middle of the Bika Valley, which is hot, let me tell you.
And you're probably wearing like all that gear and everything.
Yeah, but we were setting up a settlement. We were establishing facts on the ground for civilians to move in later. So we set up a pinat chai, so we had a little zoo, and we had a little sewing factory, and we had our kitchen. So I was the head cook, and I ran the sewing factory, and
Sounds so sexist. Yeah, it's like
totally
you're the
was.
head cook and the head of sewing.
I totally was. It was so sexist, but I did it in a uniform, so I was a chayelet.
Interesting. Did you have any Kiruv-related experiences in the army?
Yes, 100%. And actually through meeting my husband, because our third date, which was only Shabbos, because I was in the army, we went to Kfar Chabad.
I was there once.
He had a friend in Kfar Chabad, and I had a friend in Kfar Chabad. So we took the bus together. He was going to stay with his friend, I'll stay with my friend, we'll meet for lunch. But meanwhile, on the way, I got sick. And I didn't even know it yet because I just was standing in the sun, because it just felt so good in the middle of the summer in the heat, instead of in the bus stop where there was shade, because I had the chills, and I just didn't realize it. By the time I got to where I was going, I was really sick. And by the time we were into Shabbos and he came for lunch, I was really sick, and they had to call a doctor on Shabbos. It was a Kfar Chabad doctor who only spoke Yiddish, not Hebrew and not English. And I was like, "You're not touching me."
But your
I was like
future
hallucinating.
husband spoke Yiddish.
No, but the family that I was staying with.
Oh,
so,
fine.
but I was like, I had my fever was so high, I was literally like hallucinating, and I couldn't manage. And the doctor said, "Well, if she stays like this, then you could wait until Motzi Shabbos to rush her to the hospital." And my future husband was like, "Let's just take her now."
Right, yeah.
Let's just do that. So I did. I was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. But I was in at first I had to go to the regular hospital, and then they put me in the army hospital because I didn't have parents to go home and convalesce. So they take good care of Chaylim Bodedim, of lone soldiers. So I was in the army hospital, and he came to visit me every day. But all the other girls who weren't religious all around in the army hospital, because one big open ward, just think like in the 1940s. It was like, 5 beds on one wall and 5 beds on the other wall, and then
Right.
a little lounge where you could sit and watch TV if you got up well enough to like go watch, sit there over there. But I was pretty out of it for a while. Anyway, he came to visit, and they all noticed that we didn't touch. And they would ask me after he would leave, like, right, you guys don't touch, right? There's this thing, like after couples get married, like 10 days before their period and 10 days after their period, they're not allowed to touch at all. I'm like, well, there is a thing, but it's not quite like that. And so I did start to teach,
Wow.
then in that space, but because they noticed it. So, and that is why I went into the army. And I thought at that age, I went in just to close the gap there at age 18 to 20. But still today, it helps close the gap. Because still today, when people see me with shaitel, long sleeves, they're like, ma, dosi tachat, like, what dosi is?
No.
Dosi comes from dat, which is religion. Mm-hmm. But the frum say suf instead of tough. So a religious person's a dos. Mm. Right? That's just the Israeli.
It's like a derogatory slang
slightly
for...
pejorative, but it comes from das instead of, not das with an ayin, but das, dalet, taf, religious, but with a suf, because it's the Ashkenazim who say
Right.
suf.
I say
So
kosel, right.
right, exactly. So a dosit is a female dosi, right? Religious person. So they'll dismiss me as a dosit. And I'm like right away I could surprise somebody like, I served in the army. I'm not what you think. Like, take a second look.
Wow.
So you never know what's under the shaitel.
Right. So you and your husband, I want to go back to that. So why did you go to Russia?
Okay, so we founded our marriage on chesed. Excuse me, when I came back to the States, his mother had founded the Bikur Cholim of Sloan's Kettering. This is before HIPAA laws, when everything was out there. You could talk about any patient, what they had. Excuse me. So the Jews showed up Sloan Kettering every Shabbos morning, took the lists of all the Jewish patients on every floor, divided them out, and we'd go visit the patients in Sloan Kettering. And as a new visitor, so they wouldn't give us the facial cancer ward, hard to see, or the pediatric cancer ward, depressing to see, but the middle ones. And we'd go visit them Shabbos, offer to make kiddush for them, bring them down to a service. Anyway, so we did that together. And we also, was the time when the Jews were still stuck in Russia, so we did a lot for Soviet Jewry together as much as we could, and I did a lot on my campus. I went to Hunter College. And I led marches in Washington and knew all the statistics and brought student groups, and we lobbied congressmen and wrote letters and all the stuff that we needed to do. But when we got married, I wanted to live in Israel so badly. And we couldn't make Aliyah because he graduated with a law degree. And the law in Israel and the States is just different.
Yeah, whole different ballgame.
It's a whole different ballgame. There was no commuting at that time, and we had to stay. So that was depressing. And he wasn't going into learning because he had just finished a graduate degree. It's time to start working. So there's no kollel ahead. And we're like, how are we going to start our marriage with a mitzvah that's like a worthy start to a strong marriage? So we decided to go to Israel to visit refuseniks. To Russia to visit refuseniks.
I'm like, wait a second, Israel works out of that?
We went to Russia to visit refuseniks. So we went to Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev.
Wow. Hold on, and he could practice law there?
No, we just went for 3 weeks.
Oh, you went for 3 weeks?
We went for 3 weeks to visit refuseniks there. And for me, it was a transformative trip because here I was, this 21-year-old on a college campus, and I don't know if you're familiar, but 21-year-olds on college campuses think they know everything.
I can imagine.
They remind me of puppies. I don't know if you've seen puppies like play with toys, like bounce them all over the yard. Like that's what 21-year-olds look like with ideas.
Right.
They're like bouncing those ideas and playing with it, running it, tossing it, and it's so exciting. But anyway, I was pretty sure I knew everything about the world, including, of course, that America's Amreka. America was Amreka. Russia. Israel, the only place a Jew belongs. So I was very Zionistic and relatively anti-American and relatively conspiracy theory about America. Went to Russia, and I totally changed I never appreciated freedom of assembly and freedom of religion and freedom of the press until I saw Russia. and saw where it wasn't, watched people get arrested and watched and saw what was in the press and flew on Aeroflot Soviet Airlines and saw what it was like. They didn't even tell you about oxygen masks. If it drops, you're dead. There's just no safety procedures. They just write you out of history. Like, you're just not reported on in the press. So, and then just meeting Jews who lived in tiny rooms and had to write anything important on the wall because they were raided so many times. All scraps of paper were taken. So they couldn't even keep track of a scrap of paper. Or even using their bathrooms. One bathroom for 4 families.
That's a lot.
And seeing the toilet paper there, which wasn't. Pravda, the newspaper, ripped into little squares in a stack. It's like, you come back to this country feeling like, God bless America. Like I never understood that America was a force for good and a balance for evil in the world, and how necessary this country was and how good it was.
It's amazing how you decided to go to Russia to like do chesed, but ultimately like it had this transformative idea of like, don't worry, Lisa, it's not so bad living in America.
Right.
And you can't live in Israel, but like, look,
it's true.
Look what where you don't need to live.
Right. Yeah. It was really amazing to see that and to experience, that level of Mesiras Nefesh on behalf of the Jews who were there. Mm-hmm. And for us, I mean, we spent our wedding money on this trip. Like, we paid for the tickets, we paid for all the stuff that we brought. We had long lists, and we got counseled from different groups on what to bring with us. 2 sets of tefillin each, so we could leave that there. But we had to just have stories. Like, we both wear 2 sets every day, of course. So
why?
Just you couldn't bring something that you weren't using. You couldn't bring anything to leave in Russia. So you had to just lie that it's everything that you need. We needed the shofar. We needed the Michlelet. We needed a mezuzah for our
hotel room door. Sodom a little. Like, you're not allowed to give anyone anything.
Nothing. You weren't. So we brought in specific things that people needed. That word had gotten out. But we had to have a specific story for why we needed that for that trip the whole time.
Wait, hold on. With tefillin, did you say you wear tefillin?
Yeah, of course. Right. What do they know?
Right.
We each need 2 pair.
Right.
That's like normal. There are people who wear 2 pairs. Right. So they don't know who wears what.
Right.
So, and when we got there, they pulled us aside, and they went through our bags and they took out everything Jewish. They didn't recognize the shofar, but they took out everything. They made a huge pile of all the Jewish stuff, and we were both petrified, thinking, like, first of all, we paid for all that.
Right, that is a lot.
And we wanted it to get into the right hands. And second of all, we wanted it to get in the right hands. And third of all, we were scared. So, but they left us, and they told us we could pack up our clothes. So I was worried they were going to keep the whole thing, and we were worried about the whole state thing. And my husband's, like, as I was refolding sweaters, he like grabbed a Gemara and stuck it in the middle. I'm like, what are you doing? He said, they said repack. I'm like, yes, but not that. So he said, they said repack. We're just repacking. They said repack. So eventually, like, we just started putting all that stuff in. Pretty soon we were completely repacked, everything back in the suitcases. And he said, let's go. I'm like, they have our passports. It's like, oh, they do. So he went over to the guard and he said, we need our passports. And the guard said, no, you must wait. And he said, no, they said repack and you can just go. He said, yes? He said, yes. He said, they said repack and you can go. He said, okay. And he handed over our passports.
Wow.
And we left. And, yeah.
Then they killed that guy.
Maybe.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah, it was an amazing experience being in Russia and seeing what it was like. And yeah, it was transformative for me. Yeah, it was.
Wow. Okay. We will be right back to this week's episode. And I don't want to take away from the tone of it, but I am excited to tell you about the Good Faith Effort podcast. And here it is. Here's my pitch. The Bible has played a pretty important role in American society from the founding era until today, from our politics to our pop culture. But have you ever wondered exactly how? That's where the Good Faith Effort podcast comes in. Hosted by historian, rabbi, and pop culture aficionado Ari Lamb, who I follow on Twitter, and you should too. Good Faith Effort brings on incredible new guests each week from the world of politics, history, music, movies, faith, even venture capital, to host the kind of conversations you literally will not hear anywhere else. You want to hear a historian explain how the Talmud played a decisive role in political philosophy during the English Civil War? Or a legendary hip-hop exec talk about how Abraham and the book of Genesis helps him see and run DMC in a new light? Or maybe one of the world's leading tech investors explain how the prophet Isaiah informs her work with startup founders? Or how about a former reporter for ESPN reflect on the Bible's lessons for having normal political opinions in a world gone crazy? Well, all we can say is subscribe to Good Faith Effort on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. And listen into the inspirational, fun, crazy conversations about the Bible's surprising role in Western society you won't hear anywhere else. So those are my thoughts about the podcast. Obviously, I wanted it to sound nice and tight, but I also want to just freestyle now and read you a little message that I got this week. I got a few messages from people thanking me for telling them about the Good Faith Effort podcast, which we've been doing the past few episodes. But wanted to also tell you, I've been binge listening to Rabbi Dr. Ari Lamb since you mentioned him a few weeks back, and wanted to thank you for that as well. Must have listened to 35 to 40 of them already. He's brilliant and can't get enough of him and the people he engages. Wow. That is a message I got from a friend who I don't know if I would have anticipated him listening to Good Faith Effort, but come to think of it, there's so many different kinds of episodes, and Rev Ari Lamb does an incredible job at making the conversations amazing and bringing on amazing people. So someone's like, is it like your podcast? No, it's actually nothing like my podcast. I think both great podcasts, but it's so different. You got to really just take a taste if you haven't yet, and go ahead in the show notes. We have links there. Check them out, rate them 5 stars. And now back to my conversation with Mrs. Aliza Bulow. Okay, so I want to fast forward to, you being a mother and talking about a few of your kids. Okay, so you get take me between that trip and I guess now. We'll get to the core. But in between, like being a motherhood, let's get into that. Being I guess Gi Ores in Denver.
Right. So I started out. So we got married. We got married in Bell Harbor. We were both living in Manhattan. I was living at the 92nd Street Y. He was living with his parents in the Upper East Side. We got married and moved to Long Beach. Long Beach because his grandparents had an apartment there. They had both passed away, but it was a co-op, so they owned it. So his mother said, just take the apartment in Long Beach for the first year, and then you'll decide where you want to live. So we move into this building, and it's all old people. Everybody in their 80s. And we're in our 20s. All my girlfriends were in their 80s. The whole floor. Everybody was Jewish. I think only one person on the floor had an accent, which is pretty unusual for Jews of that age at that time. One was Greek, so there was a Greek Jew. She spoke Ladino. But everybody else was American born. And but I was Kiruv right away. Like here it is. I just am married, moving into this whole building of old people. But I had my lulav and esrog right away. Shortly after we got married. We got engaged on Yom Kippur because the 2 happiest days of the year are Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. So we wanted to get engaged on Yom Kippur and married on Tu B'Av. But Tu B'Av wasn't a Sunday, so we got married on Yaz B'Av. But anyway.
Close enough.
Close enough. So we got married in Yaz B'Av, and then it was shortly Yontif. And so I had my lulav and esrog, and I brought it around to all the apartments on our floor. And one of the ladies was raised in Providence. She said, I remember this. Right? You pay a quarter, and then you can shake it? And I was like, well, you don't have to pay a quarter. You could just shake it. So everybody, they're all my friends. Like I brought the lulav and esrog to them, and I made them sufganiyot for Hanukkah, and I invited them all for a Seder for Pesach. And they came. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized, why didn't they have someplace else to go? They all came, the whole floor. Yeah. It was a pretty amazing experience just being with all those older people. And I was good friends with them. And one time I was throwing out the garbage with Ruth Mandelbaum, and she said,
classic Jewish name, yeah.
And she said, Aliza, are you a member of the AARP? I said, the AARP? Do you mean the American Association of Retired Persons? She said, yeah, are you a member? I'm like, Ruth, I'm 20 26.
Right.
I'm 60 years younger than you. No, I'm not a member of the AARP. But we were just girlfriends.
Wow.
Girlfriends on the floor. Yeah.
Age is just a number.
Yeah, so they loved, I was the only one with babies in the building. So they just loved it. And we used to go, I'd have them in the stroller and I'd go down to the big laundry and we'd all be folding our husband's laundry and talking. And to a woman, every one of them said, I wish I would have had more children.
Wow.
And I really saw my future. And I thought, because I was thinking of 4 at the time. I was raised with 2, 0 population growth. You have 2 and that's it. It's your social responsibility. So, but then I'm Jewish, so I'm like, for sure 4, because that's like the Israeli responsibility. Mm-hmm. But then I'm watching these ladies and I'm thinking, probably more, because I don't want to be one of them that says later on, I wish I would have had more. So, and every single one did, no matter how many kids they had. They all said it. So, anyway, we had 4 kids in that 2-bedroom apartment until we found a house in Long Beach. And I moved out into our house, and then 2 more kids. So 6 kids in 7.5 years. And just a big family right away.
Was that difficult for you?
Yes, and I loved it.
Right, I'm sure you loved it, but still.
We made an agreement as a couple because I was definitely raised in feminist times. No Barbies, no I Dream of Jeannie, no capitulation to men kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But we made an agreement that we're going to have a traditional marriage. He'll take care of the parnasa and I will take care of the house. Mm-hmm. And that was our agreement. And so I loved having the kids, and I was surprised at it because I wasn't the best babysitter on the planet, but I really did enjoy my own children, and I learned a lot. So the more I learned, because I kept up chavrusas and I learned with different people, and I really saw the avodat kodesh in it, and I loved the kedusha of running a home. I met Tila Yeager right around after child number 2, and I charetified through the Shar Yeshuv community and started to go to the Shar Yeshuv bungalows. And I learned a lot in that way because I didn't find my place in the States. I wasn't modern Orthodox. I was more like Dati Lumi Chazak. I loved to learn. And I was careful in halacha. I covered my hair from the first day. But I wasn't Haredi.
Right,
but I was modern strong. I was careful in halacha to the way that I understood it, which was from the Shulchan Aruch, which I learned. Mm-hmm. And then I met Tila Yeager, who was a text-based teacher for women in a different way. And she taught in a very feminine way that was text-based. I'd never experienced that. Because at Bravenger's it was very masculine, but it was for women. Mm-hmm. But it was masculine. And she was very feminine, but text-based. And I loved that. And I was busy reading lots of books. I read all these biographies of all these men, because there's not that many. At that time, there were no biographies of Jewish women. So I just read all the Gedolim books. And I would try to imagine, what would it be like to be raised in that home? What if I was his daughter? What if I was his sister? What would it be like if I had a father like that or in a home like that? Just to try to give myself a Jewish childhood or the experience of it sort of in my mind so that I could give it to my kids. Mm-hmm. But with Tehillah, I really started to... so in those books, it talked about how people were mishamesh. They did shimush for a time. And I was like, I want to do shimush. But who could I ever be mishamesh? And then I met Tila Yeager, and she didn't drive. I was like, I'll be her driver. I could be mishamesh at the Talmidah Chachama. And so she started to teach in Long Beach, and I went to pick her up and would bring her into Long Beach. And that way I got to be in her home and see her davening or see whatever as she gathered little things to go, I just got to watch her and see her and have more conversations with her, and I learned a lot through her, including how to handle my second child who was ADD, and they just were inventing those letters at that time.
Before
Probably
everyone was diagnosed with ADD.
Oh my gosh.
So she helps you deal with him. How?
She made it clear that it was a test. When my father came to visit me, and he was like, wow, what is going on with this child? I'm like, it's a test. He's like, well, what do you get if you pass it? I was like, that's a good question. I don't know. I just know it's a test. So I went back to her, what do you get if you pass the test? So I learned over the course of time between her and Akiva Tatz, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, from his books. I haven't met him personally, but they're not pass-fail, these tests. They're invitations into workshops custom designed for you at your level where you are now to bring you forward. And so what you get if you pass it or as you go through it is you on the other side, bigger and stronger and more thoughtful, more capacious, and ready for a new test that's just waiting ahead to bring you forward again. So I definitely saw that. He gave me what for, and he's fantastic today. Runs a jewelry store. He's all over the place still, but he doesn't even need security cameras. Like, he sees everything all the time, but he understands people so well, and he's so kind, and he's still full of energy. He'll bike 70 miles and then go to his store. Like, he's just on it. He's about your age, full of energy, and married. He got married young. And he has 4 kids. And anyway, so I learned a lot through that. So Avi started me on the path. And then Uri, my next son, the girls are pretty easy. The boys. And then Uri, so smart. Oh my gosh, he just graduated with his MD, PhD. But let me tell you, raising smart kids is really hard, much more challenging than raising kids with learning challenges, which I also had. So I had both ends of the spectrum, but smart kids are they drop out at faster rates statistically because they've had it. They're done with school, and they're
You also feel that it's just harder to negotiate with them because they're just smarter. They know what they want, and you can't really convince them what to do.
So when he was 7, I come into the kitchen and I see a sign on their refrigerator and it says, "Danger, don't go to the library." I'm who wrote this sign? I take it off the fridge and I go around the house. I ask each kid who wrote this sign. So he says, I wrote it. I'm what is dangerous about going to the library? He said, Ima, have you seen our library? It was the library in Long Beach, right? So a little town library. I'm yeah. He said, this is how it goes. He's 7. First, you learn how to read. Then you love reading. Then you read all the books. And then you're bored for the rest of your life. I'm Uri, there's more books than we have in Long Beach. Don't worry. I had to take him into Manhattan and show him the main library. Don't worry. Read away. You will never. He had already touched up that library. He's I can finish this.
Right.
It's and then what will I do when I finish reading all the books in the world?
If that's him at 7, then him at 15,
that's what I'm saying. It's
30.
Oh my gosh. He was a challenge. He really was. And then the number 3 son, also brilliant, quirky, eclectic, challenging, and ultimately mentally ill and suicidal from a very young age. And he did, in the end, die from suicide at age 19. And it was such a journey, losing him was, so somebody said, we have 2 foster kids too. So he actually died on the same day as our foster son got married. I think he was expecting to die while I was already on the plane to the wedding. He wasn't going to the wedding, but I think he just didn't time it right. I found him before I got on the plane. But
you're the one who found him?
Yeah.
All right, so wait, take it back. This is very, very heavy for me. Take me back to, you said from a very young age she was suicidal. At what point did you realize that there was something very serious going on?
Probably 5, 6, 7. Because we lived in Long Beach. He would tell me, you might just want to walk into the ocean and keep on going. Or I want to walk into traffic.
Did you feel guilty of what am I doing wrong over here?
No, because I knew I wasn't. I was a very attentive mother.
Right.
Yeah, I did not.
But even sometimes people, okay, that's very good.
I didn't feel about that. I did not. No, because he was a questioning child.
Right.
He was always well, what makes mattresses so bouncy? If you poke a hole in an electric cord, will the electricity come spurting out? He just questions and questions and questions and questions. But we were engaged all the time. I thought he would be a scientist. He would mix things after breakfast. Even as a toddler, he'd climb on the table when all the kids were gone and mix all their cereals and juices, and it was always a potion. But he was always experimenting. He would make bad guy traps in the basement, and sometimes they worked. You'd go downstairs, trip this wire and pull that string. I was one time he brought me into the basement to show me his new bad guy trap. He's look, if you do this, and then all of a sudden, wonk, he was hit with the board that he planned to hit the person who did that, and out he was. I was next time do it with a broom handle,
Right. What was his name?
Daniel Moshe.
Donnie.
Yeah, Donnie Mo. We call him Donnie Mo.
Donnie Mo. So Donnie Mo Okay, so I guess if he's claiming he wants to walk into the Long Beach
Right.
ocean.
So we got him an antidepressants at a pretty young age, because that's what it was diagnosed to be, depression, and we worked with him, really until he was like 4. I didn't see any of this, but starting from like 5, 6, 7, more and more of this, and then we moved to Denver, and still, I mean, he just.
Why did you guys move to Denver, by the way?
We moved to Denver from Long Beach because the kids were moving towards teenhood, and
But why Denver? There's so many.
yeah, so we actually looked at actually, it was a Shiloh that I asked of Pinchas Young. I was working for Partners in Torah at the time, and I went to the AJAP conference, which I loved. I went there every year. It was a real oasis for me, like just to meet the Gedolim. And I went by myself. Like my husband would watch the kids for that weekend, and I would go and just like immerse myself in whatever learning I could. Come back with a whole suitcase full of tapes, cassette tapes, of all the classes, and just listen, and just be there and meet people. But anyway, one year I went, and there wasn't a pre-conference Shabbaton, but I didn't want to miss a minute, so I stayed for Shabbos in the hotel by myself beforehand. And I read Rav Dessler's biography. And as I read it, I thought, I've for sure asked halachic she'ilot, but I don't ask like shilas, and I don't ask hadracha. That's like not a thing. I just don't have that experience. I didn't have a father who guided me. Like
Meaning you asked more halacha based, but you didn't ask hashkafa based.
Right. I mean, I might ask, what's a test and what does that mean?
Right.
But I never asked like,
What's best for my family?
no,
Right.
because that's a Haredi thing to do, and
Right.
that wasn't part of the world that I was educated in Jewishly. Like I just wasn't there. But as I read Rav Dessler's biography, I saw how that worked in this book, and I thought, I probably now, as a mother of these 6 children, need to get some hadracha, and I feel like our family is alive but not thriving. And I was working
In New York.
in New York,
Got it,
in Long
okay.
Beach. And there were some learning challenges, and I was so thankful for the different, for Kahal as a program, that I had some kids in Kahal classes and the availability of that. And I knew there wouldn't be that availability in another city, so I didn't want to leave because of that. But my kids were getting a little stronger educationally, those kids who needed the extra help. And anyway, I sat with Rav Pinchas Young after I made a whole list of shilas after Shabbos, so just different. And one was, should we move? Like, should we not be in Long Beach? And I was thinking Passaic, like
Right, okay.
that's what I had in mind. And before I even got to that, on my
Which there are a lot of Balchuvas in Passaic.
yeah, I just was. I was like I felt like I wasn't fully in the Haredi world. I wasn't in the yeshiva world of Long Beach. But I just felt like I was the frummest certainly in the family, in the context of my husband's family. Like I was blamed a little for that. Like maybe somebody might have mentioned one time a forced march to Frumkeit, with me leading it. It's possible that happened, that a relative might have said that at some point. Anyway, I just wanted to be in a community that supported it more, that I wasn't the one constantly leading the way and pulling it forward, that I would be part of the pack instead of leading it. So anyway, before I even got to that, and Rav Pinchas Young at the time was working for Partners in Torah too, so I knew him. I sat down with him, and he said, it's very clear, as I started describing what's going on, he said, it's very clear you need to move. And off of the East Coast. And I hadn't thought of that. Because my husband had just made partner in his law firm, which meant he was completely Michlelet to the law all the time. If he would come home like squeaking into candle lighting, and the winter he would leave Motzei Shabbos, and the summer it was all the Sundays. Like it was working all the time. And he said, you've got to move off the East Coast where like law is different than this. And we had thought about the West Coast where my parents live, and we checked out Seattle, and we said we don't want Portland, Seattle, or California. So if it's not going to be East, it's not going to be the West. So we cut out the South too, because my husband's a heavy guy, and the South is hot and humid and gross, and he did not want to live there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're left with the center. So now from there, what city shall it be? So we got the ATED, which said, thinking of moving, think Milwaukee. So we thought, Milwaukee. Definitely influenced by that. And there's Tversky's in Milwaukee. Now, by Hashgacha, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, and my husband went to college in Madison, Wisconsin. So he was makarved in Madison, Wisconsin from his Sabbath-centered home experience. Like it was Shabbos every week, but they were
like traditional.
But always Shabbos. And that's where he became Shomer Shabbos, was in Madison, but partly through the Tversky's in Milwaukee. And I thought, Milwaukee, Tversky's, Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin girl. That could be fun. So I thought about it, but then we also narrowed it down to in between, not Chicago too big, and not Detroit too many Arabs, and not Cleveland. My husband had been there to visit his sister, and he didn't want that. So it was really Denver or Milwaukee. Which one? They both had a Tversky, which we liked. And I sort of felt like since I was born in Wisconsin, which was stupid to think this, I kind of knew what Milwaukee would be like. So why not go to Denver first? As if I knew anything about Milwaukee. I didn't. But I went to Denver first. I took 3 kids for winter break, and we went to Denver and checked it out. And I liked it. Came back, told my husband, I think we should move to Denver. And he didn't tell me this, but he told somebody else that I heard him say. He said, she was my Sarah. And it said Shema B'Kolah. And she knew where she was taking our family. So
Wow.
I listened to her. So he and I then went to Denver for another Shabbos.
What about him and his law firm?
So he left his position,
Really?
and it cut basically half. It cut his salary in half.
Was it he did this more for you or more for the family?
I think for the family and the direction, because what we realized was, for half his salary every year, so for millions of dollars over the decades, we could purchase for our family a husband and a father who would be there. So he was there as a mepharnis, but he wasn't there as the bedtime story reader or the Chumash play viewer or the, like, I just felt like, well, he's going to walk kids down the aisle. He doesn't know who they are.
This is such a good pitch for getting people to move out of New
Yes.
York.
Move out of New York.
I'm looking to buy here, but I'm like, should I live in North Woodmere? Should I live in Oceanside, Long Beach, Woodmere?
Oh my gosh. Our family has been transformed by living out of town. The kids have that out of town Lchaim. And okay, I could totally tell. Like, I don't have the New York fashion. Like, I definitely feel like such a country mouse when I come to New York. And you buy a salad for $25.
It's very expensive. It got crazy. Well, that's inflation. It got crazy. Inflation for the nation.
But yeah. But anyway, I love the small town community where we really are important there. Every Jew is important there, and we're really a community there. You know, you really feel it. Everybody comes to everybody's kiddushes and helps make those kiddushes. They bake cookies for each other, and like they make a little, like you're making a bar mitzvah, and all the women in the community make the brunch for you the next morning so that you could sit with your family from out of town, and all the other ladies cook for you and set it up and then leave so that you have that time. Like, it's so nice to live in a community that's that warm.
But you don't have 50 pizza shops.
No, you don't.
But you did get your husband and your kids got off their father.
Yeah, so they did. They really did. And they, like, he's a mushball now. They love him, and he's like, he started, even now, I think he started this because he started traveling with the kids one by one, adult kids. I'll take them on vacation somewhere, just the two of them, just to connect more. I think he started that after he called one of his old partners, who was older than him, a senior, when he was just starting. And he was like 70 maybe, and his wife had just died. And he was like, maybe he's only in his 60s, and his wife just, he was like, I saved up my whole life to be able to spend my retirement with my wife, and now she's gone. And I felt like, I am so glad I have you now, and we're not waiting for later to spend time together, and spend time with our kids now. Like, take them one by one. Like, he takes them on these trips, like, and it's so nice that they have these memories of him now, healthy and chatting and going, and he's really woven such important relationships with each child, like really spending time. And it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't there to help them through homework in high school and help them think about the college that they're going to and have those conversations and take those walks and whatever.
It's really beautiful. And it's like I said, it's a great pitch for out of town, and it definitely is making me think more. But I do want to go back to Donnie Mo. Well, first off, you seem very okay with discussing him and what happened. I would anticipate like you'd be crying the whole time.
Right.
And
so first of all, I think I did learn to cut off a lot of emotions over the years. That's the truth.
Okay.
And who knows? Maybe it's because I come from the family that I come from. Should I tell you a Goyish joke?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Then we have lots of Jewish jokes. Okay, but here's a Goyish joke.
Yeah, sure.
But you'll have to just understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the Midwestern farmer who loved his wife so much he almost told her? So that's the kind of family I came from. My family said I love you, but they come from that behind them. Which is very like, that's the Midwestern Protestant, like, we can handle this. So my father is very much that way, not so emotional. So I definitely have some of that stiff upper lip and get it done and move forward and take care of it. And but also it's almost 9 years. His 9th year at site is on Yud Sivan. So just after Shavuot. And I miss him a lot, but I have also realized, like, for a very short time, we went to a parents of suicide support group, which we needed for like the first 2 months. And then I was like, you guys are crazy, because there were people who were there for 10 years who are still like crying every time. And I realized as I watched them, you're holding on to your connection with your child by staying in sorrow. I'd rather hold on to the connection with my child by keeping the happy memories and and loving him. And yes, I miss him, but I don't have to be in sorrow to show that I love him or I'm connected to him. So it was an intellectual, like, a recognition that that's not how I want to maintain my relationship. My name's Aliza. It means joy. So I am Kishmani. Yeah, I have that underlying resilience and joy in my life for sure. But also he was sick for a long time. Like, I knew he was going to die by suicide.
You knew it was going to happen.
Oh yeah. I didn't know when. And I didn't know for sure, but
right.
I knew.
Were you, I guess, scared to be like in that state? Cause
yeah, I checked on him every morning when I would go wake him up. I didn't know if he was going to be alive or not. It was just.
That sounds very difficult.
It is, but you get used to it. Like,
right.
It's like for me, it was like having a kid with cancer. You should never know from it.
I mean.
But you're with somebody on a journey that you hope they're going to figure out a cure for, and they might not. And so you're living with, I don't know how long this is going to last. And of course, psychiatrists and meds and trips and suicide watches and all that stuff. But in the end, I knew that's like that. He was like.
Do you want to take us to when you found him?
So it was actually the night that I was preparing to go to Abraham's wedding, our foster son, and Donnie was hanging out waiting for me to go to sleep. I was like finishing up a bunch of things, like 2:00 in the morning. Finally, Motzei Shabbos, and finally I got into bed, and then I heard a lot. He's like, "Ema, you should go to sleep. You have a flight early in the morning." He was planning it. Like, I didn't realize. I've learned much more about suicide on the other side, that there's this thing called the tunnel. Once they've made the decision and they see the date ahead, they can become much more calm. And that's a classic place for parents or others to let their guard down. Because they're just like relaxed. And I just felt like, wow, look at this.
Oh, man.
He came with us for Shavuos. He didn't usually go out for a meal, but he came out with us for one of the meals. He stayed there to make a mezumin. Like, he didn't just leave. There was only 3, so he stayed. And wow, he's like really solid. Like, maybe we're over the hump, I thought. And then I afterwards read that, like, there is this thing, like this period of calm before the exit, because they know their date. So he was waiting. So when I went to sleep, I heard a noise, and he had a dog that was a little older, and I thought, uh-oh, Rusty, there must be something wrong. So I got up and I saw it was Donnie. We had talked about it, and he asked me, because he had Asperger's and bipolar disorder, and so he was very matter of fact. He's like, Ema, I am going to end my life. So, and when I do, what's your preferred method?
Wow.
I'm like, well, don't shoot yourself, because I don't have a preferred, but I can tell you my least preferred.
Right.
Like, don't shoot yourself.
What a difficult question
and
to answer.
And don't hang yourself. So he swallowed poison. And I knew when I found him gasping that he swallowed it to take care of me. Like, that was easier to find than the other ways that it could have been. And I called the paramedics, and because he was still alive, and I thought, like, when they arrived, I thought, whew, we're going to, it's going to be okay. But it wasn't. He swallowed. He knew what he was swallowing, and they couldn't fix it. So he was in the hospital for a while, just a few hours, when they finally let us know that, like, they don't know what to do with this. And they're going to send him for an MRI, and they checked his brain, and they came back to us, and they said, like, we've like taken him out of a few crashes, but like the next crash, we just want your permission to like not take him out of that crash because there's no brain activity really. So we called the rabbi and we explained it to him, and he's talked to them on the phone, and he headed over to the hospital, but he did say like if he doesn't make it on time for the next crash, that they can let him crash the next time. So we stood around and we said our goodbyes, and I was able to like hold his hand, and like I knew like this is what he wanted. And it was so hard to know as a mother, like you're going where you want to go. It's not where I like, because he asked me, like we worked on it. We looked online, like reasons to live. And I couldn't tell him any religious reasons because he didn't believe in God. So like, what am I supposed to tell you? You have a soul that's eternal and that you need to. And like, I could tell him you're a genius. He was a computer genius. I'm like, Google needs you. The Hackers Convention needs you. Like you can change security systems. You'll transform the world. Like you can. He's like, other people can do that. Like, I'm not the only one. I'm like, yeah, but you're brilliant. And like, he's like, it's a lot of pressure. I don't need all that pressure to like transform stuff. Anyway, there were no reasons. And finally it boiled down to like, don't kill yourself because we love you.
Right.
So he said, so are you asking me to lead a life of pain to spare you the pain of bearing me? I'm like, well, yes. But I felt like in that moment, like, oh, that's why I should say that. Like, yes, I am asking you to lead a life of pain. But why? Is that fair? Is that really fair to ask you to lead a life of pain? But I also feel, it's like sometimes parents say, I wish I could take that child's pain, but I feel like we did. Like he's dead now. He's not in pain. But we are.
Right.
And we always will be, and shared among the family in different ways. And it definitely affected the family in different ways. That's still unfolding. People are still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Each one in their own way. But my husband and I, a lot of marriages fall apart on the loss of a child, in any type of a loss.
Yeah, I can't imagine the shakeup.
But we made the clear choice to turn towards each other. We just we just recommitted that we are going to go through this together, and we have a history and we have a future, and we're going to do this together. So we decided to stick with it. And my husband said at that time when my husband had more of a relationship with Hashem than he does now, he said, if Hashem would have asked us back when we had 5 kids and we were contemplating a 6th, like if he would have said to us, I'll give you a 6th, but he's going to be mentally ill and he's going to take his life at 19. You still want him? We would have said no then. He said, but now I never would have traded him. So I'm glad we had him. I am, and I learned a lot from him, and and there were some very scary times. I'm glad that he's the only one that died when he died. Like, because there were times when I was worried that it might not have been that way. But now I have the happy memories of who he was and what he gave to our family, and it's still sad. I light a candle for him he's still part of my candle lighting.
Right.
Erev Shabbos when I think about each child. So I just think Hashem, please light up this child, 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 and receive this child. Just take this neshama and just cuddle it, because now he's with you. So. Yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned, I'm like crying, going, I apologize. You you mentioned that your husband's not as religious as he what take us through that.
So that's been a thing for us. I mean, we used to joke back in the day, because I was always on the more religious pathway. I feel like we met. You have the video.
I think in any relationship, there's always one person who's higher. Sometimes the gap is more, but that's just the reality of people. There's someone leading, in the religious drive.
Yeah. So I did have the lead. I think we met I thought we met right here, but actually we met here. He was cresting and coming off, and I was still going up. Mm-hmm. So by the time we got married, even there was a little gap that we could see more, but we decided to go through with it anyway. And it was challenging over the years, but he was Shomer Shabbos, and we would joke that we were like a modern Orthodox couple because he was modern and I was Orthodox. And then with Donnie, he said Kaddish, and I knew Donnie died before his father died, but I knew when his father would die that he would say Kaddish. And I was counting on that because he wasn't going to shul at that time. Still believed in Hashem, but he wasn't, and he was Shomer Shabbos, but he wasn't going to shul. But I knew when his father would die, he would step up and he would Kaddish 3 times a day. I knew he'd do that. I never dreamed it would be Donnie first, but he started with Donnie. So he's saying Kaddish 3 times a day. And then his father died Sukkos time. So Donnie died after Shavuos, and then his father died Sukkos. And And so he's saying Kaddish. His sister was also saying Kaddish because she's more modern. She was saying Kaddish 3 times a day with a minyan. And she came to visit us on our Haredi side of town. It did not work out so well. And it was a very sad situation where she said Kaddish in our shul, and basically it
didn't work out.
It did not work out. It worked out so badly that he stopped saying Kaddish.
Wow.
She kept saying Kaddish with the minyan when she went home.
Oh man, the reverse of what you're
But
hoping.
he stopped. He was just like, that's it. I can't be related to people who behave like this.
Oh man.
I just can't. So he still believed in Hashem, but he was done with Kaddish. And I was like, go to another shul. He's like, oh, no. Done. He was done. So, okay, he's done with Kaddish and pretty upset with Haredim, which he had been on the edge with anyway. But this was like, he's done with Haredim. And then like a year later, our daughter gave birth to a son who was named partly after Donnie and partly after his father. So his father's Nehemiah Wolf, and this is Daniel Moshe. So this baby was Moshe Nehemiah. Mm-hmm. And then he got sick, terribly sick.
Oh man.
And he had a seizure disorder. He had migrating partial seizures of infancy, which is a spontaneous start, drug resistant, always fatal, extremely rare. They didn't know what to do with it disorder. But they tried everything until they figured out that it's this, and then they put him in hospice care. And so he's just home waiting my daughter caring for this baby who's beautiful and growing, but either in pain or asleep. Either having seizures, which you couldn't even see all of, or sleeping. So, and basically they were very clear, like he'll keep seizing until his body shuts down from it. So she carried him over the course of the year. And in her mind, she thought to herself, what if he really is Donnie's reincarnation? What if he really is that neshama and he just needs to die a natural death? I could do that for him as a sister and as a mother. And so she just took care of this baby for a whole year. Who suffered? He didn't have a good day. Donnie had good times. This baby did not. Mm-hmm. And when he finally died, my husband was sending out reports about it, but when he finally died, my husband felt like, now I'm done with Hashem. Really? It's one thing to give us Donnie, who had good days and hard days and died. But it's another thing to bring a baby into the world to torture him and kill him. And he's just like, I'd rather not believe in God than believe the gods that mean.
I thought I was done with crying in this interview. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But, so I would anticipate that you and your husband are no longer together, but that's not the case at all.
That's not the case. We have a strong, loving, caring relationship.
Tell me about it.
It's amazing. Because we turned towards each other again, and we just said, look, we are in this, and we're going to be respectful of each other. So we are. So at first, the respect was a little distance, don't ask, don't tell. I knew he wasn't keeping Shabbos, but he kept it from me, but it was out of respect. We just didn't talk about it.
Was he scared that if you saw that he's not keeping Shabbos, that you'd be like, okay, then this is over?
I don't think so, but I think it was more he didn't want to hurt me.
He didn't want to let you down.
Yeah, I think it was that. So so he'd use the phone in the bedroom, but hide it if I would come in. But in the house, he doesn't drive on Shabbos, or he's not Machal Shabbos before Hesia. So,
but from your perspective, how are you so mature about it? Because obviously you would hope and want him to be religious, but right. You're seeing that he's not, but you of course love him. So how do you handle it?
So part of being a ger is being an Ivri. And I know how to be an Ivri. And even Ivri is an other sider. So it's somebody who knows how to stand alone and apart. That's why I'm a Bat Sarah of Abraham, the ones who stood alone and apart, all alone in the whole world, right? So I have that strong quality. Then when I was in the hospital with this baby dying, so I told my daughter, just go home for Shabbos. I'll stay with you. You can't even nurse him because he's on a special formula now to see if they could stop the seizures. Let me just stay. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be in a hospital with this baby. And I can be an Ivri. I'll make a Shabbos bubble around me. Wherever I walk, it's going to be Shabbos. Even though the whole hospital is full of lights and beeping, it's not Shabbos to care, but I know how to do Shabbos. I'm an Ivri. And then I look at this baby who's dying, and I'm like, but that's really sad. Like, it's one thing to be my intellectual self, right, and try to pull on the spiritual thing, and then I see this baby dying. I'm like, Hashem, this is like a very narrow place on this Gesher Tsar Ma'od. Like, the main thing is don't be scared here. And I just like thought about, okay, well, I just like have to go from one side of this to the other. Like, I'm an other sider. And then I thought, maybe other sider is like I'm a bat olam haba. Like, maybe it's the other side of the bridge that's Ivri, really, the other side of the whole world. And that's who I am. And like I added that into my Ivri identity at that time. So then with my husband, I was able to say, okay, I'm an Ivri. Like, my religiousness and my relationship with Hashem is independent. I didn't get it from other Jews, and it doesn't depend on other Jews. Like, I want to help lift, but it's mine. And I don't need my husband to feed it. I'd like him to be part of it. So here, he did tell me, he said, look, when I make Kiddush, like, I don't believe in God. So look, I don't know if you're Yotze. Like, I know you care, but I don't know who I'm saying a bracha to. He said, I think you should ask a Shaila if you're Yotze. I'm like, what if I ask a Shaila and they say no? I didn't ask him that, but I'm thinking to myself, what if I ask a Shaila and they say no, you're not Yotze? Then what? Then the empty nested couple, I'm going to have to make Kiddush, and he doesn't even have to come to the Shabbos table. Look, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm Roa Eto Nolad over here. Like, I'm not doing that. So I used my own, in this particular case, my own Das Torah, whatever I have of it. And I was like, okay, Ishto Kagufo. Wife is like your own body. Like, we're one body, right? So if his mouth says the bracha, but my brain has the kavana, then maybe his words and my kavana could make one kosher bracha. Mm-hmm. So like, I just really focus. When he makes the bracha, I infuse those words with kavana. And so he knows that's our deal. Like, I like really focus on it, and he says Kiddush, and like, he still makes Kiddush, and we still sit at the Shabbos table together, and we stopped with the don't ask, don't tell. Like, he'll say, I'm gonna read down here, and I'll go back, I'm gonna finish watching whatever. I'm like, okay. So I don't like to say, like, what did you watch? Because sometimes I'm curious, like, did he learn something over the last 3 hours where I was reading and he was like, so I'll just say, what have you been thinking about over the last few hours? But we do, like, he respects me. He wouldn't bring anything into the house that I wouldn't approve of. He even once videoed him toveling a new dish. I was like, you could just tell me you toveled it. You do not need proof. Like, I totally trust you.
Right.
You tell me you toveled it. I know you did. Anyway.
Is there hopes for you that, like, one day he'll come back?
So I'm going to Philadelphia, and I hope I find this couple while I'm there now, because 3 years ago, I spoke and I just told, it was on Shabbos, it wasn't recorded, and somebody raised their hand and said, I saw your article in Jewish Action where I had written about the Amuna Continuum, and which is, so the Amuna Continuum is, I believe there's a God. Mm-hmm. He made the world. He runs the world. He runs the world for the good. He runs my world for the good, right? Mm. So that's the continuum of belief. And I see, like, there are people who get, like, kind of stuck in there. Like, maybe they believe there's a God who runs the world. Maybe they just believe there's a God who runs the world. And he killed my grandchild. That's a mean God. I don't want to believe in him, right? Or he runs the world for the good. Okay, look, I could see where things, but not my world for the good. That's why I could cheat and steal or whatever, because, like, I am, like, maybe God's not involved in my world. Like, I see there's the continuum this way, and then there's depth in that, because you do see people who believe in all those things, but still they'll be mean to you, or lie, or cheat, or steal, or sell treif meat for kosher, whatever it is, like. But they'd say they believe all that stuff, just not very deeply. Anyway, so I was pondering that, and somebody said, so how does your husband, in that article, I said, I said something about my husband. They said, so how does your husband feel today? I'm like, well, actually, he doesn't really believe today. Been through some other things. Anyway, they came over to me afterwards in the private, schmooze at the speaker session, and they said, 40 years ago, we lost 2 children in a fire. We had 2 boys and a baby girl, and there was a fire broke out in our house, and there was a babysitter. And the babysitter grabbed the baby and ran out, and our 2 boys died in the fire. And my wife, who was standing right next to him as he's telling me the story, my wife was so mad at God, she didn't step foot in his shul for 22 years. But then they were bringing a Sefer Torah from our shul in Philadelphia to this shul here in Margate, New Jersey. And for the Knesset Sefer Torah, the rabbi came over to her and said, it's time to come home. And look, here she is. And I thought, how nice are you? You're coming to give me chizuk, is what you're doing. 22 years you waited for your wife to come back and stand next to you in shul. And look, here she is.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm patient.
I should interview them.
You should.
And hopefully it won't be 22 years for you.
Right. I just like, you know what? I can be patient. And that's something I've learned also. Like as a Gioret, I see like once I discovered the Torah, like how cool is this? Do you know what you could do with this? Like you could transform yourself and the entire planet with this. Like, let's go. And it's taken me decades to realize I'm not the first one trying this program. It's like a 3,000 year endeavor, and it's possible I won't be the one to bring it to full fruition and conclusion. So I realized there is a long game that's being played here, and that Jews altogether have moved in and out of their relationship with Hashem, in and out of their relationship with the Torah, in and out of their relationship with the Jewish people. And it's okay. Like, God's playing the long game too.
Right.
And he has patience for us, and he loves us no matter what. And so I'm working on that, being like Hashem, because we're supposed to, right?
Right, that's exactly it.
I love you no matter what, no matter what. So no matter what, I'm working on loving people no matter what. So there's some people it's easier to like, but the love, no matter what, like that's how Hashem loves us. So I'm working on it. So I love him and I like him no matter what. But yeah, we like stand together and we enjoy what we can enjoy, and then we give each other space for the parts that we need to do by ourselves.
That's truly, truly incredible. Up until now, you, like, we spoke on the phone before, and, like, you're like, yeah, we if you want, we could bring this up. There's not even why you were, like, we were even talking, because we're going to be talking about what you're up to now, core, which I want you to get us into that and explain what you're doing now.
Okay, so after we moved to Denver, I started as program director for Jewish Experience, and then I was hired through AJAP. I was hired by Ner L'Elef. And Ner L'Elef is, at that time, and it doesn't really exist anymore, at that time was a leadership training institute based in Israel that trained young rabbinic couples concurrent with or post-smicha for 2 years, part-time, and then send them out in the field for kiruv and chinuch all around the world. My job in Ner L'Elef was to follow up with the women of those couples in North America. So I was hired to be a Rebbitzin's Rebbitzin. Yeah, and I had a travel budget, a salary and a travel budget. And so for 11 years, I traveled across North America, so Canada to Mexico too, and met with Rebbitzins, Makarvot, in all different places, in all different settings. And really my job was to make sure the wives were happy so that the men had longevity in their jobs. That was like what I was hired to do. But I was able to do whatever else I wanted after that, which was help them grow as makarvot in the world and as wives and as mothers. And through their eyes, I really saw a whole different perspective. Like I knew the kiruv world well, which is why I got the job. But through their eyes, I saw the FFB world very differently. And they started to also, as they matured and as I brought them together, I made a WIC group, first an email group, so it was Women in Chinuch and Kiruv. I dropped the C of Chinuch when I made the first WIC conference, just Women in Kiruv. And I made a Facebook group, 450 women who are in Kiruv, and lots of conversation, a secret group on Facebook, just so it wouldn't, be hit by other people. And conferences. But through that, they started to see, and I started to see, like, they're trying to give Torah away for free to people who aren't that interested. And when they go home to Lakewood for Yontif, their neighbors, their sisters, their mothers are starving for that same Torah. And I realized we've got to strengthen the core. Like, what are we being makar of people to? We create this, especially like as time was marching on, we creating this whole fake, like so many people I went to would say, oh yeah, but I can't send students to that family because this, or to that family because of that. Or like we have to carefully choose the families. I'm like, why? Because we're not a good enough people that you could send your students to any family in the neighborhood? Like, what is wrong with that? We've got to strengthen the core of the Jewish people, which are the frum ones, and actually the frum women. So I felt very strongly, like, why are we doing kiruv? Only because we Orthodox people are not shining brightly enough. Why is Orthodox still a dirty word after 50 years of kiruv? And people don't want to say the word Orthodox. Because we're not living it properly. So I want to help us live it properly. So I feel like Hashem's kiruv plan is if we shine it beautifully, they will come, right? I want to create communities that are warm enough that every single one who's born into it wants to stay, and everyone else wants to join. So that requires working on the core. So I found a core.
So practically, like what?
So practically.
Yeah.
So we have 3 parts of core. So the first part is to create more Torah-based hadracha for women. So more access points for Torah-based hadracha.
It's
such a need. And especially in the light of recent events, we don't have to mention anybody's names, but it's very clear that women need to go to women. And we need to have women who are trained for that. Turns out we need to have men who are trained too. But
100%.
That's going to be my next job. But but right now I'm training women. So I created basically a master's degree in pastoral counseling and spiritual guidance for women from across the very right-wing Orthodox spectrum. I started in the right. Hasidish, Persian, Litvish, Lakewood, I have a very nice mix. I just graduated 36 women from a 2-year program with a class every week and supervision every week. Supervision in a social work type of a sense, so that's applying the information in real life, and then a project each year, so they had to do community projects, and it created a cohort, so there's really the sense of cohort that they learn with and through each other. Like, think about, I'm sure you were in yeshiva, I think I heard you talk about it.
Yeah, I was in yeshiva.
Would you say that you learned more in the shir or more from the guys that you were with, kind of in between as you processed or thought about it?
Definitely the latter of the statement.
Definitely the guys.
Yeah, I'm also Merabeim and everyone.
Right, but I'm saying from the conversations of the interaction, you
Yeah.
learn a lot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
So I've been very careful to create a cohort out of the women. They're not classmates.
Right.
They can't live together. They're not dorm mates, and that dormy time is so important to the development of a young frum Jew. Like, you need the classes, but you need the dorm experience too, because there's all that processing. It's a constant thing. But anyway, so I created that, I hope, within the cohort. So that creating a cohort where we learn through each other, all the conversations that are there, the people should see that the UK ladies should see through the Mexican eyes, and the Mexican ladies should see through the Satmar eyes, and the Satmar ladies should see through the Israeli eyes, and that they should be together and reflect together so they can grow. So I have that program. I'm right now about to start a second and a third cohort in November and January. Mirz Hashem, I have 2 different ones coming up, so I'm just gathering it, collecting the women, but the applications are closed unless you're a Rebbitzin. There's a drop of room left in the Rebbitzin cohort.
I don't know when this is going out, by the way. So
okay, probably won't. Who knows? Anyway,
so hold on. So who's your ideal target to join? Is it the core or core? How should I say it?
Core.
Who's the ideal target?
Okay, so but this
for
is
core?
just one branch of core. So who's the ideal target to join the MMC program,
Yeah,
the Mashpia Mentor Counselor program? Because mentor too small, Mashpia to maybe particular branch.
I don't know. It's safe for each of them.
Mashpia, yeah. No, so the MMC program.
Okay.
It's Mashpia Mentor Counselor program. So for that program, the ideal person is a woman who is already a role model in her community, who's approximately 40 years of age plus. I want decades with a plural of adult life experience. So if she has other experience because she's younger, but it's been involved, I'll think about her. But basically 40 plus or late 30s plus, already a role model and already broadly Jewishly educated and ongoing education. And from that place, I'll take her deeper. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not just me. I don't teach most of the classes. I shape the program, but I hire teachers and I hire supervisors and I create a program. I give attention to each student in the program, the guidance and the growth. But I really, for instance, Fegalea Landau is an amazing Satmar woman who has some children who've given her lots of learning opportunities. Mm-hmm. And she
Such a PC way of saying that. Yeah, okay, great.
And she loves them, each one. And she's really worked with them very beautifully in her family. And she's become an expert in keeping Hasidic families together. She's a go-to person. And a lot of this blossomed through her participation in the core mentor cohort. So one of her projects was to people are turning to her with so many shilas. She needed Rabbanim, Rabbanim that she could turn people towards. So she wanted to make a list of them. So that's where my participation would come in. I would say, Fegalea, you can't just make a list. You have to meet them all. She's like, what do you mean? I have to meet them all? They have to meet you. They have to know who you are. They have to be able to trust you. You have to meet them. You have to really, in a way, you have to, of course, respectfully, but you have to fahara them too to see, are they really the kind of person who will understand the family that you're turning towards them? And they have to also understand you. When they come and say, Figale Lando told me I should reach out to you, they need to know who you are. You have to meet with, you need to make appointments with all of them and sit with them for an hour. So she was a little nervous about it, but she did it. And she collected, and she called me, in triumph on her way back from Brooklyn. She lives in Muncie. She's like, I met with I forgot which Rebbe, the so-and-so Rebbe. And she said, and it was such a great conversation. And he said to me, I'm going to be calling you sometimes when I have questions about this, because I see that she's in the parsha. She totally understands what's going on, and she is an expert. So there's that. But the other guidance I would give her is also family first. So you're a mother of 8. So yes, you have a unique perspective to share, and yes, you're ma'od mevukeshet, much and very requested, and only you can raise your family. And so you've got to create that balance, discretionary time for this and essential time for that. So you have to take care of it. So I'll do that shaping, but meanwhile, it's other teachers that teach the classes on listening, on on eating disorders, on death, on pregnancy, on miscarriage, on souls and the afterlife. On some is hashkafa and some is practical. How do you handle it? How do you grow with it? Whatever it is. But I want to expose the women to a very broad selection of issues that are in the Jewish community. If their jaws are going to drop, I want it to be in the class, not in front of a person, when a person's telling them the story, right? Whatever's going on in their life. So I want the jaw dropping to happen in class, and so that they can just then really be with the person and listen and not judge, and meet them where they are and help them create their connection with Hashem and their family and the Jewish people at this time in this way. So yeah,
it's really beautiful. I have 5 podcasts, and one of them was trying to not actually tackle it, but it was this idea that I went to yeshiva, and I love yeshiva, I love my rebbeim, and I'm very connected. So I have my Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, I have my Pesach in Eretz Yisrael, I have 2 Rabbanim in America in my shul. I have a Rebbe who gives a chabura that I see every day. I have a lot of chevra. I have, chavrusa. I have my mashgiach's podcast that I listen to. I'm very connected. And my wife was she went to a great seminary, and she had her college teacher, and she loves our Rebbitzin. But that's it.
Right.
She doesn't learn every day.
Right.
Maybe she listens to share online, but they're no dedicated.
Right.
And she's busy. She's taking care of our son, and she's in school.
Right.
And literally for me, it was okay, I want to create a podcast literally for women, just to tap them into, to get women away, and not just women, men also have, they're watching too much Netflix. What could I create that's just good content that someone could feel related to? And that's really the birth of Charlene's podcast, not your typical podcast, but it's not really solving anything. It's a nice Band-Aid to okay, I'm just trying to help create more good content for women. That's really what it is.
Right.
But you're actually solving this issue.
I'm actually solving, because that's the third branch of core, which I didn't tell you about the second one yet, but the third one is core circles, creating micro communities of offline, in-person, real-time relationships among women.
It's so hard to build that, though.
So hard to build that. So it has to be proactively built these days. So core supports the women who are building those circles. Lay people like your wife who would get together, and maybe she's feeling shy. I don't know. Could I call 5 people and say you want to get together once a week or once every other week in person and do something together? Can I do that? We'll help you. You'll call a friend. The 2 of you will think about the 4 other people you want to invite, and you'll bring it together.
To do what?
Create a core
And do
circle.
what do
and
they
so
do?
it's to connect with each other and with Hashem. But first is with each other. So there is a Zohar that talks about Kutchabrichu, Oraisa, V'Yisrael, Chad Hu. Right? Hashem, the Torah, and the Jews are all one. So right now, in our world position, we have a very strong Torah pathway of connection to Hashem. Very strong. We have more Jews learning Torah today than ever in the history of the world. So the Torah pathway is nice and strong. And there's everything online. You could learn for smicha online. There's so much Torah out there. If you want it, you can have it. Where we're kind of weak is in this Yisrael place. And the Yisrael connection to each other, and the Israel, and through the Jews to connect to Hashem, and through the Jews to connect to the Torah. That's where core is working, in that space. And I feel I do have a support group for women whose husbands are no longer observant, which is not part of core. That's just a side thing that I do.
Because you're not busy enough already.
But I do want to support women. It's called 8 days a week, because that's how much I love you, first of all. And also because you need that 8th day, which is Lamala Mina Teva, right, to make this work. You need the that transcendence, 8, if you rearrange as neshama, shmona, neshama, so that's the realm of the soul, the 8. So to get everybody together there. So, but in that space, sometimes I am machazek women, like we have this support group, but I'll tell women, like, we're doing the work of Klal Yisrael right now. We're trying, like, the Jews are a disparate people, and we do have to come together. Here we have the opportunity under our own roofs to, like, bring these two people who are both Jews together in a loving relationship. And that's what has to happen for all the Jews. We have to come together in a loving relationship. And we have the opportunity to practice it in the microcosm, what needs to happen in the macrocosm. So we have we're entrusted, I see it as that, we're entrusted with something vital to the energy of the Jewish people. It's challenging, but that's our job right now, is to help carry the Jewish people by doing this little piece of weaving. But the groups are weaving also. We're trying to help fix the Jewish people to feel connected with each other. There's only 14 million of us on the planet. Think about 14 million. It's a number you could count to. And you could do it before Shavuos. By yourself.
I'm not going to try it.
You're not going to try it, but you could.
You're saying it's possible to count there.
It's possible to count. One person could count to 14 million. That's all the Jews there are. How can we write anybody off? But I'm saying, how can we write anybody off? It's us. Like, we're a very special people. And here's my Wisconsin mushel for you. Okay, so Wisconsin, you probably don't know, is known for cheese. So cheese. Let's just say this is a vat of milk, right, in here, in the factory. How much rennet do you need to turn this much milk into cheese?
I have zero clue.
Maybe about that much, maybe less. That's all.
For those listening, this is not a small room, and she's holding up a cup with a tiny amount of water.
A tiny amount of water. You don't need much. It's a catalyzing agent. So all you need is that active ingredient to transform the whole thing. The Jews are that catalyzing agent. Or you could do it yeast and challah. Like, what do you need? A tablespoon of yeast to make 5 pounds rise. But it has to be active. So we need that tablespoon. That's us. We're the yeast and the dough of all humanity. We need all of us. We have to be active. We have to be a live yeast. So that's what I want to do, is bring the Jews some life. So the Torah has been the way we've done that, and certainly for men. And women are basically using that same pathway today. And of course women should learn, but women's learning is so different than men's learning. Men learn lishma and women learn uvachein. So, which it's fascinating to think about, like the way men and women speak. As you know, there are 10 measures of speech delivered into the world, 9 for women and 1 for men. Right? Women can talk, right? But in learning, it's the opposite. In learning, women want to know, tachlis, what does this mean to me? How does it change my life? And men can learn about carbonas and taros and blah, 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 malika and all kinds of gross stuff. Like Malika is killing an animal with your thumbnail, by the way. But anyway, whatever stuff that doesn't apply at all. And they're busy learning, because it's just the talking and learning connects them. So it's interesting to think about the opposite way men and women use language in Torah learning. But the point is, the Torah path is so strong that the women are going there to get their connection rather than going to the manifestation exercise, which is the feminine way of learning. So that's what the core circles are. Like, let's get together and...
Let's get
together and connect. So it could be through learning. The point is connection. The pathway could be learning. It could be art. It could be walks. It could be field trips. It could be flip the classroom, listen to a shiur on the outside, get together to discuss, right? So, but get together in real life and create a community.
I love that. We need to create a circle in Frockaway, one of the 5 towns. Is there one already or not yet?
Not yet. No, I'd say that's the least developed branch of Torah.
Right.
Number 3.
Saying, right. What's number 2? Let's go going backwards.
Communities of practice. So I have supporting women who are strengthening Klal Yisrael, women who practice a same field within the Jewish world. I put them together in communities of practice. So I have 410 college teachers from 16 countries in 2 different WhatsApp groups, and we provide professional development and conversation among them. So we're actually, all these college teachers are, I think it's actually the broadest conversation of Orthodox Jews in the world.
Wow.
Think about there's maybe membership, but this is broad conversation of people actually talking to each other about forwarding Kedusha and Tara on Klal Yisrael. That's what they're talking about. How do you make this work? And so it's everything from the smallest questions to referrals to bigger questions to hashkafa to halacha reviews to and it's talking all the time. Like, how do we How do we move our colleagues forward? How do we create better marriages? How do we handle some of the difficulties that are coming up, whatever it is? And CORE provides professional development for that group. It's fascinating to see how that group can talk people through even a late night. I'm at the mikveh with somebody and I can't get her gel nails off. What should I do?
Right.
Even that.
Right.
To that they're experiencing this kind of pain, or how do you help a colleague go underwater with if she's scared of water? How do you help her with getting her face underwater? There's a therapist. Did you know there's therapists for that? I didn't know. So or OCD colleagues. What do you do with somebody who's preparing for 7 hours until they're bleeding? How do you help them?
Wow. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. So all kinds. So that's the Kala group, and then we have one for Chevra Kadisha, women from 320 women from 10 countries. That's not a halacha group. They don't review halachas, but it's a place to process. Because usually the Chevra Kadisha women, they don't talk to each other about their feelings. But what if you did a Torah for your mother's friend,
right,
or for a car accident, or for a baby? You need to go somewhere with your feelings, and we created that space. And they learn kavanas. They're learning Sefer Ma'abarya book with Yehuda Skolshevsky, just to learn more about those esoteric things, kavanas they could have. But it's also a practical group. There was a woman in, where is she? In Charlottesville, North Carolina, who found herself alone. She had done a couple of taras, maybe one or two, and all of a sudden there's a tara that needs, and nobody else in town. And she's like, how do I do this? But she literally went on her WhatsApp group with the Chevra Kadisha Community of Practice, and they talked her through it step by step. She did it alone. Or we have one for doulas. Also, they all daven for each other or help each other with a birth. Or one for shul rebbitzins. We have one for public speakers called Inyane Speeches Gamach. It's a gamach of speech ideas. And they share stories or sources or how to share this concept or arrange a class or whatever it is, but for Torah teachers. So we have those communities.
This is fascinating. I didn't realize this all exists. I mean, it's still, I'm sure getting off the ground in many ways.
I'd say we're mezzanine level. We're no longer startup or past that.
Okay,
but we're
cool.
not all the way out there, but we're mezzanine. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, I think a few people are going to listen to this episode. So people listening, if they want to find out more information about CORE, where could they go?
CoreTorah.org.
CoreTorah.org.
CoreTorah.org, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I like finishing off with asking a question that maybe leaves people off with inspiration. Oh, you know what? I have some fun questions at the end that I want to ask you. Okay. First of all, I think uniquely because you are a Gioras, your answers might be a little more interesting than the average maybe. But okay, if there's one person in history you can meet, who would you meet?
So I was thinking about that because I hear you ask that question. I'm like, oh my gosh, who would it be? Who would it be? I actually think I would like to meet Sarah Imenu.
Okay.
Because she's my mom.
Right.
And I tried for a little while, believe it, I tried saying Yizkor for her.
Really?
But Yizkor is very weird because you say, may their neshamot be wrapped up with the neshama of Sarah. I'm like, that's so weird to say Sarah and Sarah, and binding their souls together. I'm like, I want to relate to her as my mother, but I don't think I could do that.
Right. Okay, but meeting her.
But I'd like to meet her. I would like to meet her and just see what was she really like. Yeah.
Okay. Also, again, because you're Gioras, what is your favorite mitzvah?
So it's Rosh Chodesh today, and that's my favorite mitzvah.
Really?
Yeah. But it's my favorite intellectual mitzvah.
That's why I set this up, by the way. I knew that it should be.
What do you do on Rosh Chodesh? Okay, so you say Hallel, you die.
I'm wearing a white shirt. I don't know.
There you go. So what I love about Rosh Chodesh is the way Rav Hirsch teaches it, which is, because the pasuk is, "Chodesh is Lchaim l'Rosh Chodeshim." This month shall be to you the first of months. But Rav Hirsch says, "Chadash hazeh Lchaim l'Rosh Chodeshim." This newness shall to you be the first of all newnesses. That's the spot right when we came out of Mitzrayim, before we got the Torah, that Hashem gave us our superpower. And basically he's saying, where you come from is not what points the direction of where you're going. You will make yourself new and new again and new again. We got koach hitchadshut in that moment, the ability to constantly remake ourselves. So as a Gioras, when people say, well, I wasn't raised that way. When somebody will say, oh, Mrs. Bulow, I'm like, you can call me Aliza. They're like, I wasn't raised like that. I'm like, really? Because that's not how you get to pick who you are. It's not how you were raised. Pick who you want to be now. Mm-hmm. It doesn't actually, you get 20 years of your parents, then you get the rest of your life. But after 20, you have to take the reins and choose who you're going to be. So choose it. And that's Rosh Chodesh, is choose it. You get to pick. So I love that.
I love that. Okay, on the reverse end of it, what's the worst advice you have ever received?
That's so hard. Worst
We could do
advice.
the reverse of what's the best advice you've ever received?
Yeah, I think a go for it for sure, and really listening to yourself. I once applied to a program against my better judgment, and the person really pushed me. Apply, don't worry. We're accepting ideas stage things, and we totally want idea stage, and it's really fine. When I was just first working on core, so I applied, and the application process was helpful, but I didn't get in. Why? Because I was too idea stage. I just wanted to. I was so bad. And I knew I shouldn't have applied. I didn't want to put my ideas out there before they were fully cooked. They weren't fully cooked. And I took a chance because I was pushed. So I wouldn't say that's the worst advice, but I did talk it over with a friend. I was like, I shouldn't do it. And she's like, you have to be like the rest of us. We listened to Aliza and you didn't. So, yeah. So that was bad advice to apply, even though I shouldn't have.
Okay, that is fair. And I'm gonna, so like I was saying before I realized, I gotta finish off with my questions. There's really, I can think of like 5-10 type of questions that I end off with, but I'm just gonna do one. You definitely are doing fascinating. Literally, the word fascinating comes to mind with what you're doing now with core, and also your journey is incredible to me. And it seems like you have encountered a lot of roadblocks along the way, and it doesn't make a difference for you. You like drive around them, you drive over them. What's advice for someone going through hard times listening to this now? What advice would you give to them?
I think one of my mantras that I've come to is the path to wholeness is through the broken. You have to walk through it because there's wholeness on the other side. But there's broken on the other side of that. And there's wholeness on the other side of that. And I learned that also, like as I was in the hospital with that baby. But I heard that, it was right before Rosh Hashanah, in the shofar blasts. Because you have Tekiah whole, Shvarim broken, Tekiah whole. And the whole sets are whole, broken whole, broken whole, until you get to Tekiah Gedola, ultimate wholeness, that's Itzias Neshama. And I just feel like there's hard stuff in life. It's okay. That's what it means. Like, there's going to be hard stuff. You don't have to be scared of it. Just like walk forward through it because you can't get around it. There's no way to avoid it. You can't prevent it from happening. You just have to say, okay, I'm here to like cross this narrow bridge, and I'm just going to like put my hand up and say, Hashem, could you cross me the bridge? Because I need help and I can't do this by myself, but just like hold my hand and help me cross. So that would be reach up and walk forward. That would be my advice.
Well, Aliza, thank you for sharing everything you did with us.
My pleasure. I'm so glad to be here with you. And thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening or watching to this week's episode. By far the most I've ever cried during a podcast. I don't know if you're able to hear it or see it. I just had tears and tears streaming down my face the entire time. But wow. I recorded this a few months ago, and I don't know. I'm like, I didn't know Tisha B'Av would fall out on a Shabbos or Motzei Shabbos this year, but I said this has to be around then. I think this is a great way just to understand what loss is, and just to be more relatable. So that's amazing. Definitely go check out Aliza's work. There'll be in the show notes a link there. If you're someone in the community who wants to really make an impact and you're a lady, go for it. I could have worded that better, but I didn't. But I'm going to still roll with it. But yeah, what she's doing with CORE is really incredible, and there's so many women that want to get involved, should get involved, and really, she's changing a lot of lives. If you didn't yet go check out the Good Faith Effort podcast, go ahead, check out one of them. Just check out one, or check out 17 of them. And if you enjoyed this week's podcast, please go ahead and share it with just one person who you think would enjoy it. Obviously, rate us on Apple and Spotify. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment of a person you'd like us to talk to, or you could go to livinglchaim.com. Also, I want to announce that Living Lchaim, we started doing, this is a soft launch the past 2 weeks. We have halachas on our website. Yes, when it comes to Yom Tovim or whatnot. There's a lot of halachas and a lot of rules. So we teamed up and collaborated with Rabbi Tzvi Yaakov Stein, who has the best way of just going through the halachas that you need to know that are relevant, and it's short, it's sweet, and you can check it out on livinglchaim.com. We have a section there, and we're going to keep on adding as more Yom Tovim come out. Till next time, have a Lchaim. Living Lchaim.